Hello, everyone, and welcome to Africa Fire Mission's weekly virtual training session. We really appreciate you all taking the time out of your busy schedules to come and join us today to get some training. Today's instructor is Ed Collet. He's here to talk about extrication tools and vehicle rescue tools. Ed is a great instructor. I've had the privilege of teaching and working with Ed for the past couple years, and he's going to do a great job today with today's class about tools. Before we get started, just a couple administrative things. If you join us today for at least 70% of class, which is usually about 40 minutes, 45 minutes, you will get a certificate of attendance for today's class. Keep an eye out in the chat. You can introduce yourself, who you are and where you're from. In the chat, I'll also be providing some information about where you can take some of our other classes and receive a certificate for attendance if you're not able to complete the whole class today. Before we get started here, I'm going to pass things over to Jose, our fire safety advocate with AFM, for a word of encouragement.
Thank you so much, Mike. I truly appreciate you. I'm also very happy to have everyone around. Please invite everybody who's in the firehouse, who hasn't remembered to join us. Last week on Wednesday, I talked about honor in our encouragement time. Today, I want to talk about duty, because these are one of the pillars or some of the pillars that firefighters govern firefighters. So you see, when you're on duty, we need courage, strength, and a relaxed mind. Yeah, these are qualities that you need either in the firehouse, in the fire ground, or even in the extrication, ground. Without this, you can not be able to perform well. So how do you get to handle these tough situations, even considering that duty is one of the pillars? What you need to do is always consistently keep training at bay. Always get to train. You get into the firehouse, of course, you do the normal handing over. And if there is no fire, please get down to business. Just learn something about the fire ground, about the tools. If it is, for example, the jaws of life, if you have an extrication tool of a jaws of life, get to use it. If you have a Halligan tool, get to use it. If you need to use a delivery hose, get to use it. I'm depending on you when I'm on the fire ground or on an extrication situation. So it is your duty to make sure that you are always ready to save us. Because for me also, I make sure that I'm always ready to help you if you need any help, or to help the people who rely on us when they are in trouble. So thank you so much for listening in, and I wish you the best towards covering the duty of a firefighter. Back to you, Mike.
Thank you so much, Jose. We really appreciate all the time and effort that you put in to making things better for the firefighters throughout Africa there. I invite everyone, after we complete our training, to stick around. We're going to have a tea time afterwards where you can discuss the topic of the day or anything else that may be on your mind. For right now, I'm going to pass things over to Ed to begin our training. Take it away, sir.
Thanks, Mike. And I just want to, kind of Jose really hit on, being ready for duty as a firefighter. And just to kind of add to that, one of my great mentors in the fire service always said to be a student of the job. Always be learning, just like Jose said. That my mentors has 40 plus years in the fire service, and he still goes to classes and takes notes. So never, like Jose said, never stop learning. Always find something to learn about the fire service. We are called to do more and more every day, and that means we have to learn more and more. Today, this is kind of going to be the introduction for next week. Next week, we're going to be talking about extrication as far as tactics. Today, we're going to talk about tools and also a little bit of vehicle construction, just to give us a basis for next week, so we don't necessarily have to have a lot of time on the vehicle construction next week, but basically we want to talk about tools. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Oops, wrong one. Okay. So looking at our overview of the class, we're going to be talking about planning and training, and then the different types of tools. Hand tools, electric tools, air tools, what we consider light hydraulic versus what would be considered a heavy hydraulic tool. Looking at extrication, no matter what type of tool we're using, we're removing the vehicle from around the patient, not pulling the patient out of the vehicle. By removing the vehicle from around the patient, we minimize the potential to cause additional injury to the patient. If we just run up and yank the patient out of the vehicle, there's a potential for causing additional injuries. And for us to be doing it, this really jumps off well to like what Jose was saying. We always want to be planning and training for extrication events, giving the tools and other resources we have available. Even if you don't have cars available, you can take time to work with your tools on how they operate, know the controls very well, studying the vehicle construction and new features. This can be done either online in books, and even just going out and looking at cars, without tearing them apart, to see things like where hinges are, where airbags are located, the different construction, and then go over just scenarios like, well, if we had a person trapped here, what would we do to get them out? What would we have to move? What would we have to, push, pull, or cut? And figure out what type of tools you would use based on your resources. One of the most important things we're going to be looking at for a tool is our PPE. There's a lot of potential dangers as we're doing extrication. We're cutting, we're pushing, we're pulling. There can be debris that flies off as we're doing these maneuvers. They can get in our eyes, our hand, and cut our hands. We want to make sure we have safety glasses, some type of leather glove to protect our hands, high visibility vest. When we're doing extrication, we're working out on the roadway. Probably one of the biggest causes of line of duty deaths is by getting hit by cars, and also near misses and injuries. Being on the road doing an extrication in some cases is more dangerous than being in a burning building. We want to take all the precautions we can. Traffic control is our primary one, but also by making ourselves visible to other motorists. We want to have a helmet on to protect our head as we're moving around, potentially coming up under different parts of the vehicle. And if you don't have fire gear, optimally fire gear is the best thing for when we're doing extrication. But if you don't have fire gear, we should at least have long pants, long sleeve shirt, and enclosed shoes. Ideally safety shoes, but if we don't have safety shoes, just make sure we have closed shoes. Doing as much as we can to cover our bodies up, not to expose us to potential cuts, abrasions, and other injuries. And safety glasses being one of the big things we always should wear. Protecting your eyes is critical. You don't want to get debris in it, or even if you're using heavy hydraulics, I've heard stories of people getting hydraulic oil in their eyes and it just being very bad for them as far as what it took to recover and trying to get all their sight back. We only have one pair of eyes. We want to protect those as best as possible. So looking at some of the tools, there's a plethora of tools, be it the heavy hydraulics, the jaws of life, the cutters, the rams. Everyone, looks at those as the extrication tool. I'm kind of I like using a lot of other different tools like hand tools, power tools, battery operated saws, air powered tools, air chisels, air bags, those types of things. It causes I had a discussion with one of our academy instructors who's one of the most respected rescue guys in the state capital of Columbus and kind of our state. And we were talking about the fact that if people only ever use hydraulic tools, they lose the finesse and they lose the need to understand forces and angles and the proper way to push and the proper places to cut. The power of the heavy hydraulics and the jaws of life overcome all of the need for finesse. So, even though you may think you're at a disadvantage because you don't have these jaws of life, there's many other categories of tools out there that can be used for extrication. They just take a little more time and training and thought in it, which actually sometimes that's not a bad thing. It forces us to slow down while we're doing our evolutions, to take the time to think things out. One thing, no matter what we do with our tools, as you can see here, tools are all laid out on a nice tarp to try to minimize the amount of dirt and debris that gets on them. Once we're done with our extrication, we always want to wipe down, clean our tools, be it a jaws of life or a simple saw or a simple wrench. One of what they say is the key to actually seeing how good a craftsman is to look how he take care of his tools. These are the tools of our crafts. To be a good craftsman and to show you're a good craftsman at the art of extrication, you need to take care of your tools both beforehand and afterwards, cleaning, maintaining, making sure blades are sharp. There's the old adage, if I was giving 4 hours to cut down a tree, I would spend 3 hours sharpening my axe. The same hold true with extrication. If we're going to cut something or move something, we want to know our blades are sharp, that our moving equipment is in proper order. No matter how expensive or powerful our tools are, if they're not maintained, they become useless to us. I'll take a very inexpensive Sawzall with a very good blade to do extrication over an expensive, powerful cutter that has not been maintained, has poor quality blades on it, and has damage to it that will not operate as well as the relatively inexpensive cutting tool. That's probably a big thing I really want you to take away, that maintenance of our tools, no matter if they're the hand, power, air, or hydraulic tools, is very important. What type of tools are considered hand tools? We have prying tools, which would include Halligans, pry bars, and these can be used to try to pry open doors, move material, pry into a vehicle. Sometimes prying into a door is more difficult, and it's all about what tools do I have and which one will work the best. If there's another option, sometimes a Halligan may not be the best way to pry into a tool. Cutting tools. We all think in extrication we have saws and axes. Axes are what we use. The only thing they're really good at in extrication is to cut very light metal or to cut out windshields. One thing we forget about is knives. We should always have a good knife with us when we're doing extrication. I've seen excellent companies doing extrication that at the very end, they got hung up and kind of looked as though they were not as proficient as they are because something held up on a seatbelt and all they needed was a simple knife to cut it. Or we need to remove the upholstery around a seat to be able to see what we're going to cut next. Simple things like a knife become very handy in extrication, even though it may not be a primary tool we're using to, cut metal, move metal. It's doing a lot of the small things like cutting seat belts, cutting upholstery so we can access and see what we're actually going to cut. It's kind of the little forgotten tool that everyone should be carrying with them. Basic wrenches and sockets. Once you expose, like to take a door, once you expose the hinges by removing the fender, or oftentimes in an accident, the accident exposes it for us by removing the fender or pushing the door one way or the other. You can use a wrench and sockets to just take the hinges off of the car. Hinges aren't welded to the car normally, they're bolted on to allow for replacement of the door and repair. Be able to use tools like that. Simple screwdrivers, if we have to remove molding and trim work, screwdrivers are an excellent choice for that. High lift jacks were, and they are in some places, and that's the jack that you look at there on the lower corner that's lifting up a school bus. Those jacks used to really be used extensively in the fire service before the heavy hydraulic tools became as commonplace as they are. Now they are limited. They can move about 5,000 pounds and they have a spreading force of 5,000 pounds compared to 130,000 pounds for some of your new modern spreaders. But if it's a relatively inexpensive tool that can be used in multiple ways, it can be used to lift, it can be used to spread. We've used it for dash column removal to pull the column of the steering wheel off of a person. It can be used to open the doors, and it can be used to pick objects up. It's a very versatile tool, but again, this especially to use it safely, we need to be training on it, which this tool is a fairly easy tool to train on given some different scenarios. And then a come along is basically a big ratchet that has a chain running through it that you can use to pull things. If you connect one end to, one end goes to the bumper, one end goes to the steering wheel, we can use that to pull up a steering column. If we start to get a door open and we can grab a wrap around a door, we can help use that to pull open a door. Lots of things that we can use hand tools for that have slowly been replaced through the evolution of technology and availability, but they're still very viable tools that are effective in extrication. This is that high lift jack pulling up the steering column with just a board going through across the windshield and some chains. We're able to elevate the steering wheel. And on the right, you can do the same thing with a come along. And that actually on the right, that picture is from when we were training on doing dash removal on a lorry. So this was a very, this was a very large bus that we were taking the front column off, but it's the same concept of doing on a lorry. There's a lot of things you can do with basic hand tools. It's not so much the tools that make extrication efficient and effective. It's the training and the knowledge of the user of the tool that makes it effective and efficient extrication. Power tools come in a wide variety of different styles. You can either have a cord, and if they're corded, then you need some type of generator on your apparatus to be able to power them. They can be battery powered. That is a majority of our tools that we carry are all battery powered now. And the biggest I'll say, category of electric tools or power tools that we use are saws. You know, you have the sawzall, you have circular saws, and a sawzall is just a reciprocating saw, and portable band saws. These are actually pictures of what we carry in our rescue. We carry a bandsaw, which is good for extricating from machines, cutting A-posts. It's a little slower, but it doesn't vibrate the patient. It doesn't vibrate the vehicle. We got it for the intent of like entrapment in machinery or potential impalements, because it doesn't vibrate the material that it's cutting, unlike the sawzall, which the sawzall is a very quick and effective tool that's carried here. But as that blade goes back and forth, it actually vibrates the material. If you have a rod sticking through someone's leg, the last thing you want to be doing is choosing a tool that's going to shake that rod back and forth. It'll further the injuries of the patient. And a circular saw, for vehicle extrication, we don't use that very much. That's more in the construction of collapse and trench rescue. But with the proper blade, I've actually used a circular saw to be able to cut on a vehicle as well. Usually you need to have a carbide tip blade to be effective with that. And then other things, the impact wrench, the cordless impact wrench we carried is great for if you just expose hinges, select the proper socket, then you can manually remove, you know, the hinges that way. It's really great for being able to take off small parts and even large parts like the doors. I use it to take off fenders, you know, like carry a couple sockets with me, boom, boom, the fender comes off and they don't have to worry about it's one less thing to cut. But again, big thing with the saws is making sure you have good blades. You know, the most expensive saw will not work if it has the cheapest blade in it. You know, the cheapest saw will work even better if it has the best and expensive blade in it. What's actually doing the cutting is the blade. And one thing to remember whenever you're using a saw, don't force the saw. Let the saw do the work. You know, just pushing harder on the saw isn't going to make it work faster. And even if it does, it's going to dull. It may seem like it works faster right now, but over time it dulls the blade quicker, meaning shortly you will not be cutting as fast and being as effective with your cuts. So take your time, let the saw do the work. You can go ahead and practice. You know, you can practice cutting on just regular material that you may have scraps, you know, scraps of steel laying around, just to get a feel for how the saw works and how the pace. One particular thing on a sawzall is there's a foot right here that's adjustable, and that foot goes up against the material you're cutting. As the saw goes back and forth, there's only a small number of teeth that are always going to be doing a majority of the cutting. What is a good practice is adjust that foot to different places as you're making longer cut. If you're doing a longer evolution of cutting, if you move that foot, you're able to get more teeth involved in different teeth. So you're not always working the same teeth. Another important thing, especially with sawzalls, when you take it off the truck, always have a couple spare blades with you. I always have 1 or 2 extra blades in my pocket, not only if one dulls, but they're also various sizes. Off the truck, our sawzall has a 9-inch blade. I carry a 6-inch blade in my pocket if I get into a situation where I need a shorter blade, or that longer blade could potentially, you know, do more damage than what we actually want. I can quickly swap out to a shorter blade. Probably the one disadvantage of air tools when it comes especially to the air chisel is noise. These are fairly loud, but they are very effective. Another downside is you need BA cylinders normally to power them. Unless your apparatus is equipped with an air compressor, you would need a BA cylinder to power the air chisel or the impact wrench or your airbags. That's what this regulator is for here. This screws onto our BA, and then after the regulator, we can plug in our air chisel to be able to go, and normally we're using to cut usually light metal. We're starting to evolve that you can do some more of the heavier bars of the high strength steel with a chisel. It's effective using a flat blade as you're really hitting a single point over and over, and you're actually going to shatter some of that high strength steel. The high strength steel today in a lot of cars is actually shattering more so than it is shearing when we cut it. Even hydraulic cutters are basically shattering the steel compared to cutting it and shearing it. But the important part when you're using air tools and the air chisel is selecting the blade. As you can see here in our case, we have numerous styles of blades. These blades here have kind of a V to them. These are very good for cutting light steel, like around the body of a car, to expose the underlying structure. We've used these if you have a two-door car and you need to extract a patient from the back seat. We're able to peel the outer skin off with one of these small bits, and then we can go in and start cutting the interior structure with those bits as well. Now, the bigger, flatter type of blades, these are the blades that we're going to use on some of the heavier components that we're actually trying to get to shatter, like some of the heavier bars and the heavier high strength steel, that we would actually use that flatter, wider blade that has can take more force than some of the lighter sheet metal blades. And we'd use that blade to go ahead and try and attack and try to shatter some of the higher strength steel. Airbags are a really good tool for lifting and also spreading out different components. Predominantly in vehicle extrication, we're using them to lift objects off of victims, or sometimes we're using it to lift a vehicle to gain better access for our extrication. One thing about airbags, you want to make sure that you have the proper pressure. Every airbag is labeled that there's a particular maximum operating pressure. We want to make sure we're operating to the proper. Like right now, there are some bags run about 10 bar, and other bags on the market run somewhere around 7 to 8 bar. It's important, especially if you have intermixed rated bags in your department, that you label them very well to prevent overpressurizing the bags, which could lead to catastrophic failure. And not only would a catastrophic failure be terrible for the victim that would be underneath, when the bags fail, they often launch out in different directions, injuring our first responders. So it is important with airbags to remember, what's the maximum operating pressure and not to exceed the operating pressure on airbags. The light hydraulics are kind of the foundational tools that started out and the fire service for extrication. This here in the middle, this is called a porta power set. That's a small hydraulic hand pump with various attachments that can be used to basically spread different components apart. This was originally used in body shops to fix vehicles. If they had to pull body parts one direction or spread them to get to repair a car, they would use a porta power. And then that kind of evolved into then using it in the extrication field. They're limited sometimes. I mean, maybe 10 tons of force on a small system like this, potentially up to 100 tons if you have bigger systems. But it's all about knowing how and where to place the components to get the maximum capability out. With a simple system like this, it has a small spreader that can be wedged in the door, and with proper placement would be very good at opening the door up. Again, if you have tools like this, it needs to be trained on in order to get the most out of it. This does tie up a second individual, where heavy hydraulics, everything's pretty self-contained and motorized. One person can run the tool, and that's what you would need. In this case, you need one person to run the tool and one person to pump the hydraulics. Again, this is where we started. It works with training and knowledge. Small, simple systems like this are effective in extrication. Another light hydraulic tool that we have is our jacks. There's very many types of jacks. These are what we would consider a bottle jack. These can lift up to, these big ones up to 20 tons, and the smaller ones 12 tons. It's important to always clearly label whenever you have any tool that you're using to lift. You need to clearly label the maximum load that it can lift. There's nothing worse than trying to lift a load, like for example, these jacks. If I would use the 12-ton jack to be able to try to lift something that weighed 30 tons, not only wouldn't I be able to lift it, I would probably damage the tool. The other thing with the bottle jack, you need to kind of label how much lift you can get out of the extension and how tall the jack is. A drawback with a bottle jack, they're fairly high. Like these require like 18 inches to be able just to get the bottle jack under whatever the object you wish to lift. Sometimes we don't have that much space. That's where airbags, and I don't have a picture of it, but also floor jacks come into play. Floor jacks are another light hydraulic tool that's used in the automotive service profession quite often. They're low profile, can get under low space. Usually they're under 6 inches in height as far as getting under an object, but they're used every day, for tire changing by mechanics to get access to under the vehicle. We just recently received one of these for our heavy rescue after many years of saying, can we get a jack? They're quicker than airbags. Airbags are used even in the US maybe a very small number of times every day, yet a floor jack is used thousands of times a day around the country. It has a proven track record of being able to do the job of lifting things up. One key now that we're starting to talk about hydraulics is always looking for leaks, making sure there's no leaks in any of the lines, any of the hoses, any of the couplings. This goes back to maintaining your equipment, making sure it has not only enough oil and the proper amount of oil, but also the proper type of oil. Some of the oils if you do not use the proper type, when you mix the two oils, will actually start to thicken up to the point that the tool is not usable. We need to always be thoughtful in always using the proper oil in our hydraulic tools. If you notice, all of our hoses will have caps on them, and all of our actual tools will have plugs on the connection. We want to keep those in place to prevent dirt and debris from getting into our couplings and either causing leaks, not allowing us to fully couple the tool to the hose, which actually, if they're not fully coupled, this becomes dangerous. As we put pressure on it, the hoses can blow out of the couplings. Again, just going back as far as maintaining, cleaning our tools so they are ready to function as they are designed when it's time for us to have to use them. The heavy hydraulic tools are the jaws of life. These are what most people will consider the primary extrication tool, or even the best extrication tool that everyone needs to have. And they are very powerful and very very well to use in different situations. The one issue with the heavy hydraulic tools are, because of the force that they produce, it is very important for us to train on them, to understand how they operate and how that force can be put into and released from a vehicle. When we're using these tools, we always need to keep safety in mind. The biggest thing we want is to make sure that we do not put ourselves between the tool and the vehicle or the object that we're using the tool on. These are so powerful, they can move in and swing around and pin us against the object. And then at that point, we have to back up what we're doing as our tactics as far as what we're doing to extricate, and now slow down to be able to extricate ourselves. And hopefully there were no injuries caused by getting pinched by the tools. So that's where training and safety, knowledge of how the tool is going to move and not putting ourselves in a position are very important. As I said, some of these spreaders will produce over 100,000 pounds of spreading force. And today's cutters, will produce over 50 to 100,000 pounds of cutting force. So it's important, never put your hands anywhere near the working end of a heavy hydraulic tool, especially when someone has their finger on the trigger per se. I've seen this in training where people will point at something they want to cut, they want the student to cut, and actually have their finger in the middle of the cutter blades, which one wrong move and they don't have fingers anymore. As you can see, it's very important to know the controls. Every type of heavy hydraulic tool has a different control mechanism. So this brand here, it uses a rotary handle to actually open and close the jaws. This brand uses a button that you can see like right here and right here. That button open and closes the jaws, closes the cutter, extends the ram. And there's a few other styles of controls. When you're training on your heavy hydraulic tools, it's very important to know which directions the control moves the tools. Like on the ones I use, the lever that has an indentation, makes the spreaders go out or the cutters go in, and the other side does the opposite. This, we shouldn't have to try and see which direction the button I'm pushing moves the cutter or the spreaders. We should just know that, and it should be instinctive. Especially there are some maneuvers that we use, you have one chance, and if you press the wrong button, you will cause greater injury to the patient. While another big drawback with the heavy hydraulics is expense. I mean, these are expensive tools, and you get one or two of them, where sometimes with a given amount of money, it might be more advantageous to get power tools, hand tools, maybe light hydraulic tools, to have a broader variety of tools and number of tools. If having, multiple heavy hydraulic tools is not an option for your department. Just starting out in training on them, some of the lighter tools will be make them as effective and productive as the heavier hydraulic tools. These are really important to check for hydraulic leaks, and also to check to make sure your couplings are clean, to make sure you have a really good tight connection. The pressure in these pumps are about 10,500 PSI, which, let me look. I'm going to put that in bar real quick for us. Sometimes my metric conversion. So they run at about 725 bar. That's a lot of pressure. You can imagine the damage that could be caused if one of the lines bursts, or if a coupling comes off because there's dirt in it and we didn't get a secure connection. Again, it's important from safety and being able to do our job to clean the tools, to be able to make sure our hoses are in good condition and they're clean. We don't want to drag them over sharp objects, hot objects, things that can damage them. So that's really, the different types of tools we have in extrication. And this just shows some of our spreaders at work and our rams at work. And what we can do a lot of work, but we can also do some of the same work with our hand tools and some of the light hydraulic tools. Finally, one of the tools that people don't think about as a tool often is what we use for stabilization. Basic cribbing is an important tool for any extrication. We use it to stabilize the vehicle, not only from it moving, which could cause injury to us and to the patient. It provides a path for the forces that we're applying through whatever tools we're using to go right to the ground. For an example, if you were trying to lift an A-post without any cribbing, you would push the floor down just as much as you were trying to push the A-post up. And that's not what we're trying to accomplish. If you install cribbing, you're able to push down onto the cribbing, which then sends that force through the cribbing down to the ground, and then you'll be lifting up all of the A-posts the distance that you want. So it can be made out of wood, can be made out of plastic. The key is whatever's used for stabilization, that it's solid and has the ability to pass our forces that we're using in extrication from the car to the ground. Step chocks is another form of stabilization. It's a form of cribbing that is a pre-assembled block with different levels on it that you're able to slide under a vehicle to stabilize it. And then finally, we have our struts, which are used to stabilize vehicles on their side, upside down, and in different orientations that would be difficult to just simply use cribbing. Now, you don't need to have some fancy strut system to stabilize things on their side and get the advantage of a strut. Here on the bottom corner is a basic 4x4 that has a ratchet strap going to the other side of the vehicle, and that could be used to hold up something on its side. If you don't have a ratchet strap, but you have the 4x4, you could simply dig out a hole to set the 4x4 in so the bottom of the 4x4 wouldn't kick out. So that's all I have for tools. I'd like to open up for questions if anyone would have any. You're always good for a question or two, Mike. I mean, you should have something.
No, we'll let anybody out there, if you've got a question, please raise your hand, or you can unmute yourself and feel free to join in the conversation here.
Give me 2 seconds. I'll be right back.
Okay. I
Go ahead, Errol.
just wanted to know, in case you don't have the tools, what other kind of thing can you use for spreading and cutting?
Locally available resources. What kind of locally available resources can you use? Of course, we'd all like to have those heavy hydraulic tools like we're demonstrating there. He also, Ed, the question is about, what sort of locally available things can we use? Those high lift jacks you can really do a lot with, and they're pretty readily available.
Yeah, I mean, the high lift jacks is a great tool. The one big thing with a high lift jack that we have to be careful of, especially in lifting, they're very unstable. You have to train and take great care when you're using high lift jacks to pick things up. Other readily available things, Sawzalls. Again, they're a good cutting tool. Basic hand tools, wrenches, sockets. There are, parts of the car are welded together for strength, but there's also a lot of parts of cars that are just bolted together. And if we can get access to the bolts, we can take the car apart that way. I mean, there's a lot, usually you could get the porta power systems. Those are usually readily available. They're used a lot in body work and mechanic shops. They actually use those quite a bit, also in industry. So those are fairly readily available. Same with air chisels and air tools. There are a lot of options that should be fairly readily available outside the heavy hydraulics. And the other disadvantage of heavy hydraulics outside of price is maintenance. You need to make sure you have them maintained on the annual basis. Otherwise, there's the potential for damaging the tool, and repairing a $20,000 cutter gets to be expensive as well if they're not properly maintained. I mean, there are many advantages to doing the lighter tools to be able to do it. There will be some things that the lighter tools can't do, but that's when we adjust our tactics that we're using to take advantage of the tools we have around the type of vehicle that we're trying to extricate from.
Harold, does that
Thank you.
answer your question? Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
David, I see you've got your hand raised there. Go ahead, sir. Unmute yourself. David, are you there?
Hello.
Hello, Martin. Go ahead, sir.
Okay. Actually, mine is a few questions. I got a few questions. Actually, when I look at these rescue materials, the splitters and cutters, they need special attention because when I look at them, they have these hydraulic movements. So it means they will need often care. I mean, they need to be taken care of in the soonest possible time. Actually, during these lanes, we understand that due to lanes, they might start lasting and the like. So to prevent all that, we'll need to take care of them as soon as possible. I also saw there, you place them on a plastic sheet. That should be a tent. Actually, my question is, how often should we take care of these things? Because load accidents are there, but then they cannot be as much often depending on the load network that we have in our country. That's all for now.
And the different levels of maintenance, like for us with heavy hydraulic tools, we have a technician from the supplier check them every year to be able to go through and to make sure everything is functioning properly. All the critical bolts are tightened to the proper specification. On a regular basis, as far as the maintenance that we do ourselves, it's more of like making sure everything is cleaned, the proper amount and proper type of oil or it is in the system, making sure hoses are not damaged. Those are things that we do continually as checking the tools. But as far as any of the tools themselves, you know, we are not qualified to actually open up any of the tools and try to work and replace any of the parts inside. All of our maintenance is done is kind of making sure everything's clean to the proper amount of oil, hoses are good in good condition. And then every year we have a technician check all of the tools.
Thank you, sir.
Oliver, I
Hello,
see
Edward.
your hand is raised.
Hello, Edward.
Yes,
Hello,
yes.
On hydraulic tool, is the pressure too much?
Go ahead, Oliver.
So greeting everyone. So thank you so much, Edward, for that. Now, my question comes in. We are evolving, so technology is there with us. When I started my career as a firefighter, I remember we used to have this hydraulic equipment, but as time goes, we are substituting the hydraulic equipments now with the modern technology. We're having electrical powered equipments. So in terms of performance, in terms of efficiency, will you will you say the all not really all technology, but will you say the fast tools, that is the hydraulic tools, are more efficient in terms of performance compared to the ones we're having being powered by electricity? We have the ones that are using batteries.
oh, okay.
Yeah.
As far as the advantages, and I think what you're asking is the old style of using, our old style of heavy hydraulics had a separate motor and pump, where today we're using batteries to power these. And actually the batteries are powering a small hydraulic pump. The new battery tools are basically the same tool, but just with the hydraulic pump in it. By not having an advantage is by not having the hoses, they operate slightly quicker with the batteries because the pump and the oil reservoir is right there at the tool. It doesn't take time to fill the hoses and change the pressure across the hose before you get any action. One of the disadvantages of the battery operated tool is they are more bulky and cumbersome to some extent. Depends on the model. You really have to watch where your hand positions are. You know, if you look at this tool, the battery's all on the back. If I was spreading or doing something in the middle of the door, I would have to be really aware of where that battery handle and all that extra battery bulk is as it swings around. I was actually at a training using a battery tool, was using the cutters, it rotated into the door and the battery died. There was not enough room to change the battery. We actually had to get a Sawzall, cut a chunk. This was on a big lorry. We had to cut a chunk of the wall out to be able to replace the battery to remove the tool. So we have to have that extra level of knowing about how long our batteries last, maybe checking it on prolonged extrications. You know, from my standpoint, especially as an instructor, I like the battery tools because they're quieter. You don't have that extra hydraulic pump running that you have to talk over and, you know, as you're instructing. That's an advantage there. You no longer have to carry hoses and an extra power unit for the hydraulic tools. I mean, the batteries have made it more easy to use them in different areas. You're not restricted to however the length of hydraulic hose you have, or the time to set all the hydraulics and the power units up. You know, it used to be like at a car fire, we would, you know, do all this work to we'd cut the hood, do all this extra stuff with saws, trying to get the hood open. Now with the battery tool, it's very simple. If we have a car fire, we take the battery powered spreaders off the truck and just open up the hood that way. You know, they've opened up some more uses to the tools because it's so simple to put them in play in an operation compared to what the old style having to set the power unit and all the hoses. Was that what you were getting at with your question?
Yeah, definitely. And also, since you have mentioned about understanding the duration which the battery will serve you, so looking at in terms of the duration which the battery maybe might last. Personally, I haven't used the battery, but I've seen people using it. So in terms of duration, like if I was to use hydraulic shear, how much time will I have maybe if I ought to use one of them?
We have done multiple vehicle extrications with one battery in each, the shear and the spreaders. So it's not like if you go up and you normally, even if you're going to have to take the side off of both cars, your batteries will last. I mean, it's not a thing that you're going to be in the middle of a normal extrication and you'll run out of battery if it was fully charged when you started.
Okay, at this point in time, we're going to end our sort of regularly scheduled training, but if you still have questions, please stick with us and we'll continue to answer those as we transition into tea time. I just want to thank Ed for taking the time out of his schedule to come and train with us today. A great session today. And thank you all for taking your time to come out and and train with us and use your time and use your bundles to be with us here. Invite you to join us again next week, where we'll continue the discussion with some extrication techniques. And I would remind you to check out our YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube and search for Africa Fire Mission, where you'll be able to find the video for this training and all the others for this year, as well as jump down into the chat and take a look at the link that I provided for a Google folder where you can provide our other training as well. Thanks again, and we'll see you all next week.